Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 24. Oh no, they're traumatized. Saturday morning found Izuku waking up bright and early and booking it to the library. Well, bright and early was relative. It was already 10 o'clock, but he had been using Saturdays to try and make up for all the sleep he tended to lose during the rest of the week. Regardless of the time, he had a lot of research to do. He needed to read up and study as many videos of knife throwing and sparring as he could before he was due to meet Eraser later this evening. He was not going to go in there ill-prepared and make an utter fool of himself. Eraser already pointed out every flaw in his fighting technique after 1.5 nights of patrol. So even if he wasn't expected to know anything about knife throwing, he couldn't let himself look completely useless. Eraser said he had potential, and he was not trying to change his mind, even if the sentiment was under the misguided assumption that he wasn't a null. Eraser didn't need to know that, and Izuku would literally rather die than tell him. Ivy was allowed to be mysterious so they could get away with not broadcasting their quirk, or lack thereof, indefinitely. Hopefully. The library was always busier when he went on the weekends, probably given that it wasn't usually 6:30 a.m. when he went on weekends, so he was pleased to see that his usual spot was still open. Oh, Shinso was there too. He's never here on weekends. As he walked over to his usual spot, Shinso greeted him. "Hey, Midoriya," he said with a wave. "Hey, Shinso. What are you doing here on the weekend?" he asked. "Oh, the lady who has this shift had to call off for something, and my mom dragged me along. Are you usually here on weekends?" Shinso asked back. "Not always, but sometimes." Their conversation trailed off as Izuku went about the research he had planned to do, and didn't take long for Shinso to ask about what he was researching. It caused Izuku physical pain to not immediately tell Shinso that he met Eraserhead. He ranted and raved about the whole thing to DJ, but she didn't really match his energy level about the whole situation, and he very desperately wanted someone to freak out with. Unfortunately, there wasn't a casual way to tell Shinso he was a technically legal vigilante, and Eraserhead had offered to personally teach him how to fight. No, there would be a lot of concerned questions about that, and he couldn't risk it. He also couldn't come up with another feasible reason why he'd met Eraserhead at all, much less had him offer to mentor him. "Oh, just some self-defense and other stuff like that," Izuku replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "Do you really know how to do stuff like that?" Shinso asked, looking at the video about knife fighting playing on mute over his shoulder. "Oh, I know a little. I'm trying to learn," he replied awkwardly. "That's pretty cool. You want to be a hero or something when you grow up?" Shinso asked. "Huh, yeah, that would be nice, but I don't think it's in the cards for me," he responded, doing his best to keep the melancholy from seeping into his tone. "Yeah, I get that. I don't think it's in the cards for me either," Shinso said, looking down at his feet. Not in the cards for him? Why not? He hadn't told Izuku what his quirk was, but he did say he had one, and if it was anywhere as cool as his mom's, he could make a great hero. "I bet you'd make a great hero. You shouldn't give up on yourself so easily," Izuku said, looking away from the computer screen so Shinso could see that he was serious. Shinso tried, but couldn't quite meet his eyes. He looked sad. I mean it." Shinso's face scrunched up somewhere between a grimace and a frown. He clearly didn't believe him. Izuku probably shouldn't push the matter, but he couldn't stand that look of defeat on his face. "You don't have to tell me. But why do you think you can't be a hero, Shinso? Shinso looked like a deer caught in headlights. He was finally able to meet his eyes, but they were filled with fear now, and that wasn't really preferable to the look of defeat from before. Oh, crap. He screwed up. You don't have to tell me, Shinso. It's okay. Really. Izuku tried to backpedal. No, it's fine. It's just my quirk isn't suited for heroics. Ah, okay. Shinso was just an idiot. He could work with that. Shinso, one of the top 10 heroes in Japan, is a washing machine with a bubble quirk. Izuku quipped flatly. Shinso snorted at that, but still didn't look convinced. No, it's not like that. It's different. It's just not going to happen, Midoriya. I've accepted it. You have your reasons, and I have mine. Let's just leave it at that. For what it's worth, I think you could make a great hero. Maybe you shouldn't give up on yourself so easily, Shinso said, immediately turning around and going back to his spot without giving Izuku the chance to argue. Well, he was going to have to convince Shinso he could be a hero one way or another, but apparently not today. He had research to do anyway, and he was on a time crunch. Hitoshi was a stupid idiot coward. Why the hell did he say any of that? He went in and set himself up for the perfect opportunity to tell Midoriya about his quirk with no intention of following through, and then just walked away. Kami, he was so awkward. He shouldn't be allowed to interact with the general populace. He went back to playing stupid flash games on the computer in order to resist the urge to launch his face through the desk. There was something bothering him about that interaction, though. Why did Greenie not think he could be a hero? He was clearly a genius who apparently already had a head start on knife fighting capabilities. What could be holding him back? He'd been operating under the assumption that Midoriya had some sort of intelligence quirk, but maybe not. Maybe he was like him. Maybe he could understand. Izuku had scheduled to meet with Eraser at 6 o'clock tonight, and he had stashed some potentially usable power tools in the freezer at Dekoba yesterday that he wanted to bring back to the warehouse before leaving. He also wanted to go through some warm-up drills on his own before he left. So he left the library around 4 with a wave to Shinso, who had been avoiding him since their conversation earlier. Hopefully, things would be less awkward come Monday morning. On the way back to the beach, Izuku stopped by a big box drugstore and swiped a single black eyeshadow compact. Eraser had only ever gotten to see him in the dim glow of streetlights, with his features mostly cast in the shadow of his hood. Hopefully this would make it hard enough to recognize any distinguishing features that would be on display in the full light of day. It would at least cover up any freckles that peeked out above his mask. By the time 5:30 rolled around, there was a pile of junked-up power tools sitting in the lower landing of his stairwell, and Izuku was suited up and inexpertly smudging black eyeshadow around his eyes with his index finger. It was messy, and it looked a little too edgy for his taste, but it was better than nothing. Deciding it was as good as it was going to get, he set off, staying above street level and out of sight as much as possible. He'd never really been out as Ivy in the daytime. It felt wrong. Taking the long way around had him showing up on the rooftop just before 6, but he didn't see Eraser around yet, so he figured he wasn't too late. Izuku sat on the ledge, kicking his feet and keeping an eye on the time as he waited. It wasn't until 6:03 that they heard Eraser touch down on the other side of the roof. "You're late, Eraser," they taunted over their shoulder before lazily turning around. "Had to make a stop," he said, gesturing to the large and slightly beat-up piece of cardboard he was holding. It looked like he fished it out of a dumpster. I didn't realize we were on such a strict schedule. He snarked right back. Ivy was just about to ask what the piece of cardboard was all about when Eraser turned to the wall of the roof access stairwell, held the board up to it, pulled out a knife, and with no insignificant amount of force, stabbed it into the top of the cardboard, pinning it to the brick wall behind it. Well, that was a bit more than mildly threatening. He turned around after he was done, as if that wasn't the most off-putting display of strength he'd seen from him yet. Maybe it was because it was so casual, or maybe it was because there was no one else here, no common enemy. Whatever. They shook the image from their mind. It's not ideal, but it'll do for now, he explained as he pulled out a marker and started drawing messy concentric circles. Oh, it was a target. Okay, that's fine. hmm. I don't think I can throw a knife with enough force to stick into a brick wall, Eraser. Ivy pointed out awkwardly. I don't expect you to. The cardboard's just to show accuracy. That's what we'll be working on first. Building up the strength to throw a knife into a brick wall isn't a skill I'd want you to have if you don't have the aim to have it hit where you intended it to anyway. He responded nonchalant as ever. Yeah, that made sense. I'll bring a wood panel some other time when we start working on the power behind your throws, he added. Okay, sounds good. Ivy responded, still feeling supremely awkward about the whole situation. We'll get to all that later, though. First, I want to see your hand-to-hand skills, he said, as he shifted his feet into a fighting stance and faced Izuku. Oh, Kami, never mind. This was far more threatening than the knife thing. That wasn't even directed at him. He could already taste the gravel that covered the rooftop. This was not going to end well. It was just flat open space up here, except for the roof access thing. There was nowhere for him to get high ground or run away to without just throwing himself off the roof. Eraser was right. If he didn't have the element of surprise, he might as well just be a little old Deku facing down Kachan and his goons at school. He was no doubt broadcasting his fear because Eraser relaxed his stance before speaking. I'm not actually going to hurt you, kid. It's just a spar, he said in a much more gentle tone than he usually spoke in. Kami, he was supposed to not be making a fool of himself, and now he no doubt looked like a deer caught in headlights. You've never sparred before, have you? He continued without waiting for an answer. Right, let's set some ground rules. No head or groin shots, and if you get the opportunity to land a hit that might actually injure your opponent, then pull your punch and match point will automatically be given to whoever found the opening. Is that agreeable? He asked. Yeah, that's fine, he choked out after he'd gotten some semblance of a hold of himself. All right, a pulled punch or pinning your opponent wins the match. You good to start? He asked, graciously ignoring their mini panic attack. They're Ivy right now, not Deku, and Eraser wasn't going to hurt them. This was fine. They mirrored his fighting stance before replying, yes. Immediately, Eraser charged at them, and they dove out of the way, missing them by a hair. He made a few more passes before he brought out the capture scarf, and Ivy so good at evading that. Less than a minute after they had begun, Eraserhead ensnared their ankle and sent them sprawling into the gravel. Ouch! Ivy, I already know you can evade. I want to see if you can fight, he said, removing his capture scarf, releasing their ankle, and setting it aside. Come on, you make the first move this time. I'm ready when you are. Oh, Kami, they're screwed. How did he make disarming himself look threatening? Come on, you're Ivy, not Deku. Ivy, not Deku. You know how to do this? You've done this. You could do this. Just do it. Getting up and taking a moment to shake out their nerves, they thought about what they'd seen of Eraserhead's fighting style. He was just another opponent. They needed to analyze him and find his weak points. He wasn't anything special, just another opponent. They didn't even have a quirk to worry about this time, since his was useless on them. All right. Eraser's fighting style. Whether consciously or not, Ivy had built up a skill set pretty similar to his. He used the environment to his advantage. Where most people saw barriers, he saw tools. But there were no barriers here, putting them both at a disadvantage. That didn't help. What what else? Eraser said they weren't supposed to be working on evasion, but that didn't mean they couldn't use it to their advantage. It really was the only advantage they had against Eraser. Ivy was faster, but Eraser was stronger, so the only way they were going to win this fight was if they managed to get in close, land a hit, and retreat until they tired him out enough to take him down. However, if Eraserhead managed to get a hold of them, or even just get one good hit in, they were toast. It wasn't a good plan, but it was the only one they had. All right, here goes nothing. Without warning, Ivy charged at Eraser, feigning a right hook, but actually putting their momentum into a kick to his flank. Eraser still blocked, but Ivy expected that, and they were already on the retreat before he could land a hit in return. Ivy continued to bounce around him, forcing him to keep turning to keep them in his sight, not giving him the chance to throw a punch or do much of anything besides dodge. This was not a viable method. It expended much more than their energy, much more of their energy than his. As expected, they started to flag, and Eraser managed to land a glancing hit to their ribs. It wasn't enough to take them down, but it definitely didn't feel good. It was just a game of cat and mouse. If he had kept his capture weapon or capture scarf, this fight would be over just as quickly as the first. He was going easy on them, but there was still no way they were going to win this. Eventually, one of Ivy's punches was slow enough for Eraser to grab them by the wrist and wrench it behind their back, pinning them to the ground. Oh, that was a familiar sensation. He was pinned down and defenseless. He was pinned down, and they were going to hurt him. There was nothing he could do. They were going to hurt him. No one was going to help him. He was alone, and he was too weak to save himself. They were going to hurt him. He had to get out, get out, get out, get out, get out. He thrashed around, and the pressure released, but his ears were still ringing. He scrambled away and turned back to see his attacker. Wait. No. Crap. Ivy hoped that their quickened breaths could be explained away by all the running around they'd just done, but if Eraser's concerned look and raised hands were anything to go by, they were guessing they probably couldn't just brush that under the rug. Flip. Crap. Oh, great. Dang it. Kami. Eraser was right. They couldn't fight for crap. This wasn't even the first time this happened. Whenever Ivy got backed into a corner, Izuku came out and screwed everything up. The last time this happened, he had to learn how to give himself stitches because some thug left him to bleed out in the alley. He was lucky he walked away from that. Eraser's mouth was moving. Oh, crap, he was trying to talk to them. Pull yourself together, dumbass. You're fine. You're not bleeding out in an alley this time. You're fine. Just freaking breathe. Just breathe. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Out for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Rinse and repeat. Once he got a hold of himself, he shoved the ivy mask firmly back into place. Shota approached this situation poorly. That was pretty obvious in hindsight. He was operating on autopilot, as he would with most of his students, a bunch of cocky, self-righteous, flashy quirk toddlers that grew up on gentle parenting and the whole world as their cheerleaders. Obviously, Ivy was different. He didn't exactly come in guns blazing, threatening expulsion, but he should have known, given how they cringed when shown the slightest bit of kindness, that they weren't exactly the picture of perfect mental health. They always looked scared before they'd even started, and when he squared up, they froze. He should have stopped then, but he didn't want Ivy to think he was coddling them. He had a feeling they wouldn't take kindly to that either. They had been doing well during the second round. He could hardly land a hit, and they were forcing him into defense. It would have been a good strategy if they packed a little more of a punch, but as it was, they just tired themselves out and gave him the chance to pin them. He shouldn't have taken the chance. He should have pulled the punch and called it. Dang it. Now Ivy was sitting on the ground, looking up at him without seeing him, and dang near hyperventilating. He put his hands up in front of himself to show that he meant no harm. There seemed to be a flash of recognition after a moment, but they weren't calming down. Ivy, you're okay. I'm not going to hurt you, he said, trying to get their attention and or calm them. Kami, this would really be a problem if this happened while they were on patrol. Freezing up like that would get them killed. He couldn't let them go out alone, knowing this was a risk, and they really aren't going to want to hear that. Whatever. He's getting ahead of himself. One problem at a time. The kid started to mutter something under his breath that he couldn't fully make out, but what he did hear was enough. You're not bleeding out in an alley this time. You're fine. Oh, great. So this had already happened to them on patrol. How are they still alive? They appeared to be working their way through a breathing exercise now. The fact that they knew to do that was both reassuring and alarming. It was good that they knew what to do, but clearly this was a frequent enough issue for them to have learned how to deal with it, which was less than ideal. He remembered what they said the other night. I've always been a target. That was a loaded statement, and one that Shota desperately wanted elaboration on, but he knew he wasn't going to get it, not anytime soon at least. For now, he just had to wait patiently and let Ivy get a hold of himself. He felt useless. After a minute, Ivy drew in one more deep breath, and their expression dropped back to the jovial, snarky little shit face they normally wore. It was unsettling the way they flipped on a dime. Right. We're not going to talk about that, they said in their normal chipper tone. He was not qualified to deal with this. I think we're gonna have to talk about that, kid. But we can save that for another day. He was not equipped to have that conversation without talking to Zashi beforehand. This was their area of expertise, not his. He knew how to talk to traumatized kids. It came with the job, sometimes both jobs. But this situation was beyond delicate, and he wasn't about to risk screwing it up by demanding answers. No, he needed to field some questions first. Maybe he should ask Hound Dog. No, never mind. He could psychoanalyze this later. You seem to have a good foundation to start from, but I am a terrible matchup for you, which unfortunately for you, makes me the perfect teacher. We largely excel in the same areas, mobility, stealth, and strategy, but I've got you beat on strength and experience. What we need to focus on is your strength and confidence. You hesitated too much, and if this were a real fight, that could get you killed. Your strategy, however, could have worked if you could pack a bigger punch. The knife work could help you there, but as you said, ideally, You don't want to go around filleting people. I noticed you were aiming for pressure points, which is a good strategy as well. But if you're going to against someone who knows how and when to block, then that's not going to help you. However, a block can only do so much against brute force. Your size will obviously limit how hard you can hit, but you could still bulk up. A small frame helps with speed and agility, but bulking up a bit shouldn't impede those too much. Ivy seemed to take this spiel in stride, but given how he'd just watched their expression change on a dime, he's not sure how much he trusted it. Do you agree? He prompted. Yeah, I need to get more stronger. Now, how about throwing knives? They asked, with a feral gleam in their eye. He was going to regret this, wasn't he? End of chapter.